One of my concerns has been that we have used very good explicit instruction to introduce new skills, and yet, since our intention is always learning, many times I find that the students are not retaining what we have taught. And the pursuit of this led me to a big study for the last 6 months on the research on practice. And partly I agreed to work with Alaska and do a webinar series for them on practice. And so I'm going to give you kind of the condensed version of it. But we have to really put some energy into this because our goal is not just doing activities. Our goal is ensuring that these students actually retain the information. So this is part one. We're going to have one more webinar on practice. And then our third one, you can send in your potential topics, but our fourth one is going to be really in August, right before school starts, what we can do to get people to actually do what we would hope they might do. So that is sort of our vision, and I hope this webinar will be useful to you and to the colleagues that you work with. So let's get going. I sort of borrowed the title, Make It Stick, from one of my favorite books in the area of practice, which is called Make It Stick. And all of the books that I've been reading recently are at the end of the webinar for your reference. So Chapter 8, of course, in Explicit Instruction introduces and talks about practice. And this is sort of an extension of it in terms of information. So basically, here's what we know. And I'm going to read, and you're going to say the next word, so we're all involved. It is virtually impossible to become proficient at a mental task without extended practice. Boy, don't we know that one. Whether it's learning a foreign language or learning algebra or remembering the sounds for letters, anything that we want to retain requires extended practice. And it has to be practice that goes over time. As Anonymous said, use it or lose it. And that's what we don't want. We don't want the students to lose the most critical information that we are teaching. So here is what we are going to cover. What is practice? What are the purposes of practice? And then, most importantly, the principles drawn from the research on what can we do to optimize practice so that retention is the outcome. Is that not what we're all about? So what is practice? Well, practice. First, it is that you are deliberately performing an activity or exercise, deliberately performing it. And you do that regularly and repeatedly, and your goal is either to acquire a skill or to improve or maintain it. Now, so much of that is really critical because we do a lot of things every day that we don't do deliberately that really couldn't be called practice. This morning, I fixed my breakfast. I had a beautiful breakfast because I'm home in Oregon. It's a beautiful spring day, so I had honey yogurt, my favorite, and I had frozen blueberries with it and granola. Now, I did not say to myself, oh, let me think about how I can get better at making this breakfast. I just and ate it even mindlessly. And so that is just experience. That is not practice. It is where we deliberately perform it. I want to be better at this. I want to be better at my cello. I want to be better at writing this chapter. I want to better understand the ability to figure out an algebraic equation. And it's done over time. So what do we know about practice? Well, there's actually more than one kind of practice. And this is really critical that we have to think about at different points of learning, what is our purpose in the practice? And we could spend a whole 24 hours on just this slide itself, but let's remind ourselves of the big ideas. So one kind of practice is where students are just getting a little bit of minimal competency on a skill or body of knowledge. We're just introducing how to sound out words. we're just introducing how to write a paragraph where all of the sentences go together. We are just introducing how to solve for X. We're just introducing how to change one measurement, like inches, into feet. And so we're looking for minimal competency. Now, this means that we're going to be present as teachers. We're going to be guiding them in doing it. We're going to be providing scaffolds as necessary. We're going to do everything to say, here is the task, and here they are, and we want to raise them up to that point. So there's a little bit different intent in that practice. Then the students have some competency, and we want to improve it. We want to have them sound out words more quickly. We want them to write that paragraph and add some transition words. We want them to be able to read a story problem and write an equation and solve for X. So there is an improvement of the proficiency. And then another purpose is automaticity. So we want them not just to be able to figure out a fact, but we want them to recognize it instantly, freeing their mind when they are doing higher order activities from having to figure out simultaneously that fact. So they have more room in their working memory. We want them to be able to spell words with automaticity so that they will be able to put their cognitive energy on the manuscript that they are preparing, not just on the spelling of that word. And, of course, one of the major reasons that we would have practice is to protect from forgetting, and so that they will remember it over time. Of course, all of these, if I want to move you into proficiency or into automaticity, then that practice is going to assist you in not forgetting. And finally, we want skills to transfer. That if you have taught students a sound that they can do within a short word, we want them to transfer that to being able to sound out a syllable in a longer word. If we teach you how to write a paragraph, we want you to be able to transfer that and utilize it within an argument. So the reason for looking at this is how we would select the practice and use it would be dependent on where we are in learning and thus what is our purpose. Well, we're going to spend most of our time today on the research on how to optimize practice. And this has been such an interesting pursuit by reading studies not just in education, but in cognitive psychology of what we know about learning, that we could make the practice better by making it deliberate. Deliberate meaning we are going to write this paragraph, and today we're really going to concentrate on being certain that there is a flow. We're going to keep rereading it to be certain one idea leads to the next, and that we show the reader through use of transitions. Very deliberate. And the next one is the biggest one I'm going to stress today, retrieval practice. Not just rereading the information one more time, but trying to pull it out of our brain and retrieving it. And then space practice, not having it all the practice in one session, but have it spaced over time for better retention. And if we want the students to remember it, then we have to have some variety in the practice. I just saw an example of that this last week in visiting a first grade, and the teacher was introducing the number 12. And then the students saw the number 12. They made tally marks for 12 with groups of 5. Then they counted blocks with 12. Then they made on their paper hands to show 1 hand and 2 hands, that's 10, and then 2 more to make 12. Then they had to write equations under the teacher's guidance for 12. Varied practice, so they had to think of 12 in many different ways, increases retention. And mixed practice would mean that after we've been introduced to something, it's interspersed and mixed with other things that we have learned, so that we have to discern, should I apply this strategy here or not? Should I apply it here or not? So those are the big ideas that we're going to look at, and each one of them is something for us to consider as we look at materials and ask what kind of practice is given, and we look at our own practice and ask, what kind of practice are we giving, with always, always the intent learning, not just having homework, not just having an activity to keep them busy, but having something that leads to retention and learning. So I hope you're excited about this topic as I am. So let us leap on it, and we'll start with deliberate. And so I'm going to read. When I stop, say the next word. Deliberate practice is goal-oriented practice consciously devoted to improvement of a skill. Well, now, I can certainly see that with my cello playing. If I go upstairs today, as I will, and get out my sweetness cello to practice, and I just say, oh, I'm just going to go through a few songs and a few scales, then probably it's going to make no difference in my cello journey at all. But if I stop and I say, all right, I am going to consciously work on the tone. In fact, I'm only going to do open strings today, and I'm just going to work on the tone of it, and I'm going to work also on short as well as long bowings. And I will have some growth. Deliberate practice. I don't think we're doing this and setting children up for deliberate practice when we have them do assignments and tasks designed to improve their skills. But they consciously have to have intention to improve. So here is one study, and there's lots of studies in this area, and not surprising, many of the studies were done with college students because the researchers were profs and college students were available. But this one interested me because we all type. I've typed for many, many years. You have too. So this involved 60 university students. And they brought them in and they assessed their typing abilities, their accuracy, their fluency, and then they interviewed them about their experience typing. And what they found was that those college students who had attended a typing class in the past, but who also said, you know, I am always working on improving the fluency, the quickness of my typing, that they simply were better typists, that they had intentionality, not just to type away, but to actually improve their typing, particularly in terms of fluency. And the conclusion was, as it was reported by Hattie and Yates, this. Simply performing an activity, even daily, does not in itself alter one's expertise level. Simply performing an activity, even daily, does not in itself alter one's expertise level. There's a lot of things we do every day, but we don't necessarily get better at it because it is not deliberate practice with intentionality. So let's just do a little activity. And so here is a question. Why is A an example of deliberate practice and B is not? And so A, as you write your paragraph, you're telling the kids this, as you write your paragraph, stop and reread your paragraph to be sure it makes sense. Add transition words or phrases to make your paragraph flow. Versus a teacher who says, using your paragraph plan, write a paragraph. Now, just thinking for a moment, and I want you to say it out loud, an explanation here of why A is deliberate practice and B is not. So take a moment to think about that. So I'm certain you said something like this. Well, in A, the teacher has established a purpose and intentionality, that they're not just going to write the paragraph, but they're going to reread it. They're going to think about, does it make sense? They're going to see if it flows from one idea to the other, versus just writing a paragraph, which in itself may not improve performance on writing a paragraph because it is not deliberate. So, you know, I think that this is something that we can all add when we give practice activities to students. We've taught something, they're practicing it. We can assist them in making it more deliberate by either us establishing the purpose of it or having them say, what are you going to be working on as you do this? Deliberate. To me, the most important idea, though, as I read the research again and again, was retrieval practice. This one I just want you to add to your constant repertoire. I'm looking for retrieval practice. So I'm going to read, and when I stop, say the next word. The effect of retrieval practice is finding that long-term memory is increased when some of the learning period is devoted to retrieving the to-be-remembered information. Not just rereading it, not just going over it one more time by the teacher, but actually trying to retrieve it is what strengthens our retention. When you read this research, sometimes it's called the testing effect because the teacher will give little quizzes so the students have to retrieve the information and find that, yes, there is a definite effect in terms of retention. And so, retrieval practice. Now, I'm going to teach you two little lessons. You've got to have a piece of paper if you didn't download the handout, and you need a writing tool. Because I want just to have you experience retrieval practice and within our teaching as well as within independent practice. And so one day I was watching a teacher teach in middle school a lesson, and she started with a review of what they had covered in the last few weeks. And so I'm going to teach that very much the way it was taught that day, and then I'm going to teach it with retrieval practice so that you'll feel the difference and have a better idea of how one might make significant more difference in terms of retention than the other. So, getting ready. Be my students. So, students, pretend it's a Monday. Welcome back to math, and we are going to take a moment to go back and review what we covered last week. And so we were looking at numbers and learning some labels that are extraordinarily important to us. And the first one was integer. Now, you'll remember an integer was a whole number that had no fractional part or decimal part. So it's a whole number with no fractional part, and it could be positive or negative. For example, a positive 3 is an integer. It's a whole number, no fractional part, and it has, it could be positive, but it also could be a negative 3. A negative 3 would also be an integer because it's a whole number with no fractional part, and it's negative. And so a negative 16 or even a number like 198 are still whole numbers, no fractional part, and they can be positive or negative. Well, we also went over rational numbers. And you remember I highlighted for you ratio because I wanted you to remember that a rational number can be represented as a ratio or a simple fraction in which both the numerator and the denominator have to be integers. Those are whole numbers that have no fractional part. And Q, the denominator, is not equal to 0. So, for example, 1/2 is a rational number because it is represented as a simple fraction. Or if I had 1.5, I could represent it as a simple fraction with 3 over 2, and then it would be a rational number. Well, so we also looked at absolute values. And you remember we had that number line up, and we showed that if we have a number that is positive, that is 6 on the number line, its absolute value is 6. But also, if it is a negative 6, the absolute value of it is 6. All right. I just want you to think for a moment. Do you think it's possible that some students might have checked out during that review? See, the teacher thought, oh, what I need to do is go back over what we covered last week and went over the material in a similar way as it had been presented in the past. But cognitively, the students didn't have to be present. They would check out, and there is no effortful practice. They had nothing that they had to retrieve. So get ready for what it would look like if we did review as retrieval practice. Welcome, Monday. Let's take a moment and go over the vocabulary that we had in the last 2 weeks so that we can use it as we are discussing math this week. First of all, I want you to look at these numbers, and I want you to write down all the numbers that are an integer. So everybody, write down the numbers that are integers. Hey. Of course, if I was in your classroom, I'd be moving around the room, doing walk around, look around, talk around, monitoring. So let us look at these, a little feedback. And so -5 was an integer because it is, first of all, a whole number, and it has no fractional part, and in this case is negative, but integers could be positive or negative. So 1 and 43/100 was not an integer, and tell your partner why it was not an integer. You can talk to yourself. And then I'd call on someone, and they'd say, well, it can't be an integer because it has a fractional part. And 1 3/4 and 2s, tell your partner why that can't be an integer. And yes. And then I call on someone and they say, well, it has a fractional part. And 97, I see that everyone had that down on their paper as an integer, and ones tell your partner why it is an integer. So after we would do this, we would give them feedback on it. Now I'm all set here to have more practice if there were errors, but I'm sure you did very well. So looking over here. So on your paper, I want you to show and be able to explain why 2 is a rational number. So on your paper, you're going to write a proof that 2 is a rational number. Okay, let's look at this. Look at the bottom. So 2 could be represented as a simple fraction of 2 over 1, where both of those are integers, and the denominator is not 0, so we have a simple fraction, 2 over 1, thus it is a rational number. The day that I watched this, I thought, there's probably going to be some kids who are not certain of that, so after giving them feedback, then I would have them try again. So, your turn. So I want you to, on your paper, show a proof of why 75/100 is a rational number. Show how 75/100 is a rational number. You ready to explain it? Okay, you probably have something like this, 75/100ths, and it could be reduced to 3/4. There we have a simple fraction, and it is a number where the numerator and the denominator are integers. Feel the difference in terms of retrieval practice. Now I have engaged you. Now you are present. Now you are held accountable. Now you have to retrieve information. But you're given immediate feedback, so if you've made an error, learning will occur. Boy, this is one of the places where we as teachers, in doing review in the classroom, need to not tell again, but ask, so that our review is don't tell, but ask, and then give feedback to the students. Well, let's dive deeper into retrieval practice. And I gave you more practice on that, thinking you might need a little bit more. And so if you have it, pop over to 32. So retrieval practice has been studied with many different studies, different populations, different types of content that they were to learn. But I think this one speaks so much about retrieval practice. So here, the subjects were given a passage to read, and there were two conditions. One condition, they simply reread it and reread it and reread it. And the second condition is that after reading it, they had to recall as much as they could on a free recall test. They wrote down what they remembered. And in this case, for the purpose of the study, they were given no feedback. So one group read it numerous times, the other group read it, and then had to recall as much as they could. Retrieval practice. And then when they looked at this, the people who had to do the retrieval practice had significantly higher understanding and remembering of it than those that simply read it again and again. This would be useful for us to remember this study. If I really want to remember an article, instead of just rereading the article and maybe even highlighting it with yellow and purple and so forth, if I would stop after I read a little bit of it and try to retrieve the information. Oh, the key detail here is the most important thing that was said. The most important concept was. The purpose of the author was. I'm going to remember so much more than just rereading it and rereading it. Some of this speaks to what our students need to do and what we need to do. Well, let's look at some other studies that were with school-age children. So this was a study done in 8th grade science. And they studied science, and in one condition, there was a third of the material, well, a portion of the material that was covered in 3 low-stake quizzes with feedback. So during the course of this time, a portion of the material, they had a quiz on it, and they got feedback. A portion of the material, and they got feedback with low-stakes quizzes. The review condition, sort of like that traditional review that I did, where they would simply go back over and review the material, also 3 times. Okay, so the first group had to retrieve the information on a little quiz, and the others simply went back and reviewed it and reread it. But look at the results. On the material that was quizzed, they got an A-, and the material that was not quizzed, which is on the final test, a C+. Interesting. I like this little study because you could do it right in your own class. If you're a science teacher or social studies teacher, it'd be kind of interesting to do this for that purpose. Well, so basically this is why retrieval practice needs to be your big takeaway from today. Retrieval practice makes learning stick far better than re-exposure to the original material. This one we just need to engrave on our brain. Retrieval practice makes learning stick far better than re-exposure to the original material. Go right back to those little lessons I did in terms of vocabulary and the difference of retrieval practice and just having it gone over one more time. Well, let's just look at some other things we know about retrieval practice. So when you look at all of the studies and put them together, retrieval practice does what? It strengthens memory and interrupts forgetting. Retrieval practice makes the knowledge easier to retrieve. So it strengthens the memory, but also it strengthens the ability to retrieve it. And it simply makes our neural pathways stronger, which allows us to remember it and to retrieve it. Now, you know, we could practice this every day with just little things, like you meet someone, and in your brain you try to retrieve their name and what you've learned about them, and see if you're later able to remember them, remember their name. So you could practice this all the time and see if you can strengthen your own memories through retrieval practice. But here's something that is interesting, that if we have to put effort into it, then the learning is deeper and more durable. And just listen to the last statement from this same book, Make It Stick. Learning that's easy is like writing in sand, here today and gone tomorrow. Now, just last week, I had a perfect event around this issue. So I was visiting a classroom, doing observations in many classrooms, and one teacher, when students made errors, didn't correct them. So when we debriefed, I said, why did you choose not to correct any errors? And the teacher said, well, you know, I like to make things really easy for my students, so that they have a lot of success. And so when they make an error, I just say, oh, I better make it a lot easier for them. And so then I change what I am doing. This may not be such a great idea, because the end result is, if I do not have to put effort into it, if I do not have to dig it out of my neural pathways, if I have not had to retrieve it, I may not learn it. So it's not that we should make it so difficult that error rates are really high, but we shouldn't make it so easy that the kids don't have to put any effort into it and have to retrieve it either. Well, there are lots of ways that we can do retrieval practice. So here I have given you a list of the things that a teacher might do in terms of practice. And so I could give practice without scaffolding, as I did in that review. Here's some numbers, circle the ones that are integers, and then give feedback. I could give quizzes and low-stake quizzes so that they have some points that are going to go into their grade, but I'm going to do that along the way, often called pop quizzes, but I might even tell them, every Friday we're going to have a quiz, and you're going to get points on it, so they have to do retrieval practice. I could do rapid retrieval practice. We could play games that have retrieval practice. I could have you write down everything you've learned. I could have you look at a drawing in science and then have you draw it on your own. I could have flashcards. I could even have electronic flashcards. I could have you look at multiple choice item and have to retrieve it. I could have you do written answers and then go back and check your answer. I could have you fill in a writing frame. I mean, it's immense possibilities. So let's just take a few of these and show how they would be retrieval practice. So I was working with a social studies teacher and the teacher said, my students never remember anything that we've covered. And I'm really concerned about this. And I said, well, let's look right at the research at your grade level, which is middle school, and we're just going to do a plan that will improve it. So the plan was, on Friday, the teacher would give a short quiz. We designed it so that there was one short answer or on new material. So they had one short answer that they had to write out, and that there would be 2 multiple choices on new material that they had studied that week. And then there would be 2 multiple choice on old material. I wanted to make it fairly short and also easy for the teacher to grade. And the kids got potentially 20 points towards their social studies grade, because middle school kids are concerned about grades, so it had points. It was low stakes. It wasn't like 100 points. And then when the teacher finished a unit, there would be a test that would have 100 points. So what did the teacher find? Well, the students remembered more and did significantly better on the unit test when there was interspersed on a regular basis these short quizzes of retrieval practice where they had to pull out the information. So it was a perfect example of a simple plan that added more retrieval practice. Well, the teacher kind of got into retrieval practice and even changed the reviews at the beginning of class to retrieval, so that the students had it embedded in the lessons as well as these short quizzes. Now, did the kids love the quizzes? Not initially, but when they saw that if they studied over time and did these retrieval practices with these short information, which the teacher gave feedback right away. So they took the quiz, they got immediate feedback that their accuracy on the unit test went way up. Well, this one is an example from my trips to Australia, which I'm sort of preparing for again. I'm going to go this spring and again next fall and then following spring. But I was in classes where the teachers had taught foundation skills that the students really wanted to retain, and they made some rapid retrieval practice exercises. So, be my students. And so they had taught some pretty fundamental foundation information like this, irregular verbs. So, be my students. So this is not retrieval practice. This is a rehearsal of the information. Today I speak. Yesterday I spoke. Now, when I watched the teacher do this one, they actually did it in a way. Today I speak. Yesterday I spoke. Today I write. Yesterday I wrote. Today I go. Yesterday I went. Today I drink. Yesterday I drank. Today I swim. Yesterday I swam. Today I see. Yesterday I saw. Today I sing. Yesterday I sang. Today I fall. Yesterday I fell. Today I hide. Yesterday I hid. Okay? So that was the initial rehearsal of it. But when they had these little sessions, maybe 10 or 15 minutes a day, where they went back and reviewed with rapid retrieval practice, then the teacher would pull up this slide. So be my students. We're going to go back over irregular verbs. These are ones that do not end with ed when we want to have past tense. So remember, this is today and this is in the past, and so get ready to do it with me. Today I speak, yesterday I spoke. Today I write, yesterday I wrote. Today I go, yesterday I went. Today I drink, yesterday I drank. Today I swim, yesterday I swam. Today I see, and so forth. What I found was, and the teachers then would keep this slide, and they would have in these review sessions, this slide would come up and they would do it, and after they had taught it, and if the kids got really good at it, then they put it sort of in a mastered list, and they would occasionally come back to it to maintain it. But isn't this a smart thing to do? The teacher said, it's not enough to teach it, I've got to maintain it, and I need retrieval practice to do it. An idea that we can take to our classes. Well, we could have a quick write. You have your pencil ready there? And so I want you to list some benefits of retrieval practice. So think about what are some of the benefits and quickly make a list of them and begin. All right, so just made a list, and let's see if you have some that I was thinking about. Well, first, I'm absolutely certain that you wrote down the benefits of retrieval practice is learning, is retention, is improving automaticity, that the students are cognitively present, that it is effortless, effort-filled practice. They have to think about it. They're digging deeper neural pathways. You have some of those? Well, let's look at some others. So another type of practice, that was a quick write, a quick draw. This is one that I saw in a science class. So the teacher was teaching about plants. The students had a picture of this. The teacher gave them a chance to study it. And then the teacher said, all right, turn it over and draw it from memory and label it. And the teacher did this 4 days in a row. And so that the students were getting better and better and better, having more and more detail on it. But it is an example of retrieval practice, the way the teacher didn't just say, copy it. The teacher said, turn it over, draw it from memory, and label it. Then they counted up how many things they labeled, and then the next day they tried to do more, deliberate practice, and the next day they tried to do more, deliberate practice with retrieval. Well, you're not going to have time to do the quick draw, but later you might want to. Flashcards. I bet every teacher listening to this has used flashcards. And they are an example of retrieval practice, where you have something on the front, you try to retrieve information, and then you turn it over and use it for verification. So maybe you have the vocabulary word, you're looking at the word, you say what the meaning of it is, you turn it over and get it. So it's a perfect example of retrieval practice. Now, in the research on using flashcards, basically they almost always had two sets. One set, that's the one you're going to be practicing from, is new content that's been added, new vocabulary. Maybe you have flashcards for information in your foreign language class, and on the back you have the meaning. And so it has new content and also difficult content that you have not retained with reliability over time. And so you are looking at the front, you're saying what that word means, maybe it's a German word, you're turning it over and looking at the back. And then when you get it down, it goes in set 2. And then occasionally, like every 2 weeks, we go back through the mastered content, and if we're unsure of it, poof, it goes right back to set number 1. So there is an organization here of the retrieval practice, whether it's done with the teacher or with the tutor or with an individual. And, you know, it's so interesting. Go and find on your tablet, your iPad, or your iPhone, electronic flashcards. You can take something that students might find boring and make it very exciting by putting it on electric flashcards. So another possibility is something like this, where the teacher puts up a question and the students with hand signals or with clickers or with Plickers show their answer. So let's look at this one. Select the best answer. Get ready. I'm going to read through them, and you decide if it's 1, 2, 3, or 4. Retrieval practice that is effortful promotes more learning. Retrieval practice should occur after modeling and guided practice. Retrieval practice reduces forgetting and strengthens learning. All of the above. So, hold up your hand, even though I can't see it, and show me, is it 1, 2, 3, or 4? And it is 4, all of the above. So, having items like this is a perfect way to do retrieval practice. Just because you don't know about Plickers, let me introduce you to Plickers so that you can explore this active participation. So looking at the picture on the left, you see these students are holding up a scan card, just like you'd see on items in the grocery store. And every student, the teacher went to www.plickers.com, and downloaded these. And then on their computer, they put in a multiple choice question. And each card has written on it above the scanning, A, B, C, D, or 1, 2, 3, 4. And the students put up the card. In this case, they put it up so that 4 was on the top. And then the teacher has downloaded on their iPad or on an iPhone or an Android the app for this, and just goes and scans the class. Now look at what comes up. What the students see on the screen is this little graph. 3 people picked A, 2 people picked B, 24 picked C, 4 picked D. So then the teacher can go through, why is A not the correct answer? Why is B not the correct answer? Why is D not the correct answer? Why is C the correct answer? So that they can discuss it. But on the phone or iPad, the teacher also sees who picked the wrong choices. Isn't that amazing use of technology, particularly because, whoa, it's free. So I went into a class recently where the teacher, an 8th grade language arts teacher, was reviewing parts of speech. And it's not inherently thrilling, but the teacher had multiple choice questions, and the students would figure out the answer, hold up their card, their special Plicker response card. The teacher would scan it, the information would come up, and then they had very good discussions about why they chose that answer. And the teacher, using Plickers, turned it into a very exciting activity. So it's a great one to add to our retrieval practice and our active participation. I'm enjoying using it, and it's so easy to use and terrific. Well, retrieval practice was our biggest idea today, but not the last one. And so benefits are learning and more retention. But if it's effortful, it doesn't happen immediately, but happens a little delayed, then there's more learning and more retention. It takes more effort, thus more learning. And if it's delayed and it's effortful, more learning, more retention. And if it's repeated, we do that retrieval practice more than one time, like the teachers I saw in Australia who had those little review sessions. They did it more often. And so then there's more learning and more ease of retrieval. And if there's feedback, there's even more learning. So retrieval practice, that's the big idea that I want you to take with you from this webinar. But let us look at this example, just to be certain that we've got retrieval practice down. And so I want you to read through these, and one of them is the best example of retrieval practice. So read through it, think which one, is it A, B, or C, is the best retrieval practice. Now the kids have already taught fractions, and they've already learned how to take a fraction and change it into a decimal. So this has been with I do it, we do it, you do it, it's already been taught. Read through them yourself. A, B, or C. Now, my hope is that you picked B, and let's just look why. So when we go to A, students have already been taught how to change a fraction into a decimal, but the teacher says, watch me again. So they go over again the information and then have the students do it. And so the students aren't really having to retrieve the process because the teacher is going over the same material one more time. And why isn't it C? Well, if I was just teaching this and I was showing you the process of changing a fraction into a decimal, showing you a worked problem is extraordinarily useful. But it's still scaffolding, and I want to be able to move beyond that, where you just got a problem and then you got feedback. And that is what B did. The teacher gave them a fraction, told them change it into a decimal, and then gave them feedback by working with the group. Basically, retrieval practice is after we've done, I do it, we do it, you do it, the students have shown some proficiency, they're moving from minimal competency to increased proficiency, and then we would have retrieval practice. Well, what else would the research tell us? One is spaced practice. Often it is referred to as distributed practice, where instead of having all the practice massed in one session, it is over time. And so this one is one that we know well. But look at the effect size of spaced practice, that if it is not all in one session, but is spaced over time, the learning and retention is much greater, and the effect size is a very high effect size. So just look at how Brown talks about this. Gains achieved in mass practice are transitory and melt away quickly. I've always used my cello as my best example because basically I do mass practice. I go to my lesson and do the practice, and that's it, without spaced practice. But the more I do spaced practice, the more I learn, even if I hold time the same, which is what the studies have done. So you either practice all together in one mass an hour, or you do it for half hour and then you have follow-up sessions of 15 minutes, same time, same effort, but spaced practice, you remember more. And so I'm going to read when I stop, say the next word. Because this one, wow, is a finding we should never forget. Distributed learning in certain situations can double the amount you remember later on. Double the amount that you remember later on. So there's many studies on this, but this one I thought was a useful one. And I happen to be reading it. Sometimes I go to a nearby hospital cafeteria to work, and I was reading the study that day there. So this study was done with 36 surgical residents, and they got 4 short lessons on how to reattach tiny vessels. Okay, you had surgery, and you have tiny vessels that need to be reattached. And in condition A, they received all of those lessons on one day. In B, there was a week in between it. So they had one lesson, and a week later another lesson, and another week later. And then they had to do a task where there were damaged vessels in rats, and they had to reconnect them. And those in condition A who did all of the 4 lessons in a single day scored lower on all of the measures of all the testing that was done. And 16% of the rats in A were so damaged by the attempts to reattach it that they like died. So I was sitting there and I wanted to rush over to some of the surgeons and say, oh my goodness, I hope you got spaced practice so that the vessels would be reattached in an appropriate way. And it was just the fact I was sitting right there in the hospital cafeteria as I was reading this study that I will never forget it. But it was just an example, a perfect example, of the power of spaced practice. Now, we looked at it in this way, and that there is initial practice where I've done modeling and I'm guiding you through it, and now you're looking pretty good, and then I have you practice it with my observing with the purpose of being certain that you're reaching minimal competency. And then we have distributed practice where we'll have short sessions after we have gotten to a level of competency to continue building up our proficiency. And then we might even couple it with cumulative review where we go back over it over time. So that is a pretty easy way to remember this. Initial practice with distributed practice and then cumulative review. So one of the things that's been asked is, well, what kind of interval should be used for spaced practice? And so this, to me, was many studies, and sorting through it, it appears that if you're going to have spaced practice, it has to be at a point where there maybe just a little forgetting has set in, requiring more effort in terms of retrieval and finding that memory and remembering it. But it can't be so much that you have to totally relearn the material. So if I'm going to come back in a day or two where you might have a little more effort, because that effortful practice, but not so much that I have to stop and say, oh my goodness, let's go over the whole thing again. Now, there was a wonderful study that was done on foreign languages. And the researcher got his daughter and his wife to learn a language with different schedules and to find out what kind of schedule would be the best for remembering. So they had initial practice of information and study, and this was the interval that appeared to be the strongest. Then 1 or 2 days later, they had to have retrieval practice. And then a week later, they had retrieval practice. And then a month later, they had retrieval practice. Wouldn't you know that that research has now been put into an app called Super Memo, where you can get that kind of schedule for your own learning. Now, you know how sometimes there's just these things you just have no idea how it happened. But when I was reading about spaced practice, I opened up my iPhone, and this is what was on my iPhone. Learn Greek. Greek, I don't want to learn Greek. So for some reason, this app that I had never asked about popped up. And they have incorporated, if you were able to see it, my study sets, which were new information versus mastered, and then your spaced repetition. So you would have so much you'd study on one day and then the repetition. In other words, they took the research and put it into this program. So it was retrieval practice and spaced perfectly based on the research of foreign languages. It made my heart sing, and I still have no idea why I had this app pop up. But one day a teacher said to me, Anita, in our core program, I'm teaching vocabulary, and when I teach the vocabulary, I'm doing it all in one session on Monday, and the kids don't remember it. So we sat down and said, let's be selective about the vocabulary, and on the very next day, you're going to have a short session of quick retrieval practice. And then on Thursday, you're going to have quick retrieval and some elaboration, a little bit additional information with the difficult words. Well, the teacher had exactly the results we'd expect from not having it all masked on Monday, but having retrieval practice with a game on Fridays that reviewed the difficult words from each week. heard of cumulative, so that she could have cumulative review. Now I look up at the clock and I say, oh no, we have more to go, but we'll just have to pick it up in our next session on practice. But I just want to say to you, isn't this fascinating? We're going to whip to the end. So varied practice we'll discuss a little bit more when we return. Next time, we'll have that as our beginning. But we'll just leave us with this statement, and I don't see any questions. So if you have a question, type away. Practice isn't the thing you do once you're good. The thing you do that makes you good. Practice isn't the thing you do once you're good. It's the thing you do that makes you good. So I just hope that we will start really seriously looking at practice, no matter what the class is. And if you have a question on practice that you want included in our next webinar, then send it right to me at archerteach@aol.com. So Jackie, did we have any questions that came in?
No questions about what you were presenting. We did have a sound query that we were able to work out.
Okay.
There was a little bit of feedback. One of our attendees shared that the explicit instruction training has been helpful.
We are so glad. We would want it helpful. And that person might want to read on not just explicit instruction, but the books that I've recommended here on practice. Love Willingham's book, Why Don't Students Like School? And whole chapters are on practice. Make It Stick, Cognitive Psychologist on practice. How We Learn is a new book that just came out that I've enjoyed very much. So looking at these books to increase our knowledge of practice.
Fantastic. Thanks, Anita, for taking the time today to check back in with your trainers and share more useful information with them. And we appreciate all of you that were able to take the time to join us today. As Anita mentioned, you can always email her with questions and suggestions for her other webinars. And we will send out a recording link within the next couple days so that you can review this information. And then we will see you coming up Wednesday, April 29th at 10 a.m. for the next webinar.
Absolutely, and just a reminder, we are doing the week-long training in Portland, Oregon, and again sponsored through Safe and Civil Schools. So if you have colleagues that said, I should have gone to that training, well, tell them it's still happening, and Safe and Civil Schools will be glad to send them information on that. Thank you, Jackie, and thank all of you for continuing your work on explicit instruction.
Thank you. Thank you.